It does have incestuous themes, you're not wrong, but because of the genre of classic Golden Age Hollywood melodrama, that dynamic makes him feel more queer-coded, and it has to do with gender dynamics, patriarchy, and the inability to express yourself in a repressed society or situation. Now, this feels like a tricky point to make, so before I go any further, I want to be very clear that this has nothing to do with any intrinsic part of queerness. You're a moron if you believe that, get off my page, never watch any of my stuff again. To me, Golden Age melodramas are about control. Dr. Patricia White, in her excellent special feature on the Written on the Wind Criterion, talks about emotional violence being more important than physical violence in melodramas, and I think that's fundamental to understanding them. I think this emotional violence is most commonly expressed via emotional control, and it's the reason you see the powerful gay guy as such a recurring archetype in melodrama. The 1946 movie Deception with Bette Davis and Claude Rains is as good an example of this as anything. That movie is explicitly about, well, deception and control, with Claude Rains as an uber-powerful gay guy who's trying to dominate and control everything around him. And the movie is a fascinating exploration of him doing this on gender, racial, and class-based grounds. I have a whole video on it on my channel, and the argument I made then, which I would also apply to this movie, is that it's about control and what a woman represents in your life as a dude in a repressed society like 1940s or 1950s America. Like, let's get really brutal with it and break it down to some buckets. In this time, as a dude, from a gal, you get friendship and intimate emotional connection, a public, socially acceptable companion that you can bring to social events, a companion that you can live with, as Burt Lancaster and his sister do in this movie. More darkly, if you get married, you have someone that you have physical, legal, and financial control over, and yeah, sexual partner. So if you're a gay guy in a repressed society, you still get access to most of that stuff if you marry a woman, or in Lancaster's case, from your sister. She's his companion. In other words, gay men, even though they're themselves oppressed, still have access to the power of patriarchy, in the same way that white people at the time still have access to white supremacy, and rich people have access to economic control. This is what makes Deception so good. It shows how Claude Rains tries to control women, Asian people, and lower class people in the same way. It's such a brilliant exploration of what power vectors he still has access to despite his obvious queer-codedness. You can see elements of this in so many gay-coded male archetypes in melodrama. Who gets to control who is the central battle at the heart of the genre, and emotional control is the way that everyone besides cis-straight white men could express power. Clifton Webb in Laura is very obviously gay-coded, and he wants to prevent Laura from marrying someone else because it'll break up their companionship. George Sanders in All About Eve explicitly is interested in Anne Baxter because he will get to control her.
And you realize and you agree how completely you belong to me?
Yes, Edison.
Then take your nap.
Dirk Bogarde in The Servant and Christopher Walken in The Comfort of Strangers are both written by Harold Pinter, who explored this repeatedly in the British upper class. Charles Laughton in The Strange Door wants to control his daughter's marriage as revenge. Clifton Webb, again in The Razor's Edge, is training Gene Tierney in the art of emotional control. George McCready in Gilda is more sexually interested in Glenn Ford than Rita Hayworth, but he still wants a kind of ownership of her. Claude Rains, again in The Phantom of the Opera. Even Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard. I personally think that one of the reasons she's been an icon for gay men is that movie is a kind of gender-inverted expression of this story. It feels like it's a mostly sexless relationship where she's dominating him for companionship, which thematically is much more aligned with all the characters that I listed rather than equivalent women characters of this era and genre. In all those movies and in this movie, again, it's not because of anything fundamental to being queer, it's because of oppression and alienation and social situation. Gay men were not able to fully and openly express themselves in public relationships, so these different sort of companionships are produced that still give them access to several buckets of what you could get from a woman in the time, and only from a woman if you were a guy. And it's not just gay men, and it's not just the genre. In this genre also, you also have the conniving woman archetype. Think Dorothy Malone in Written on the Wind, Anne Baxter herself in All About Eve, Katharine Hepburn in Suddenly Last Summer, Gene Tierney in Leave Her to Heaven in The Razor's Edge, where they're expressing power along similar lines via emotional and relationship control. You can also see this a lot in later stuff relating to narcissism and religious trauma. In Carrie, for instance, a horror movie, Carrie's mother is trying to control her because of their internalized religious repression. On a milder level, I just did a podcast with friend of the channel Michael, partly on the movie 35 Shots of Rum. And that movie beautifully shows the complex relationships that develop in this immigrant family in Paris. In that movie, the companionship dynamics are complex because of alienation, isolation, and tragedy. The mother of the family has died, and they're kind of in an indifferent environment. And as the daughter is shifting fully into adulthood, there's a realistic and sympathetic portrayal of the dad's conflicted feelings about it. Not in a creepy way, but from the standpoint of he is losing his companion, someone who has been somewhat playing many of the roles, cooking, going to social functions, emotional support, that his wife used to. For me, that's where I fall on Sweet Smell of Success with Burt Lancaster and his sister. I personally didn't get like really dark incestuous vibes, but I do think that's a valid possible reading of it. I just interpret him more as a powerful gay guy character in the vein of the ones I mentioned earlier, given the dynamic of him and Tony Curtis and what he's looking for from his sister. Lancaster in this, in terms of companionship, is losing just about as much as a straight guy would if he lost his wife. Just not the sexual relationship, and in this case, because they're brother and sister, not the legal and financial control either. But it's still devastating, arguably even more so, because where can he find someone else willing to be in this kind of companionship? And I think that's why there are so many of this archetype in the genre, not because of anything that intrinsically has to do with gayness, but because it's a product of its time, a time that was repressed and oppressed and alienating for so many different kinds of people.